In 1991, Disney came out with an animated version of Beauty and the Beast. It was an instant hit. My kids included loved it. But what a lot of people don't understand is that Beauty and the Beast wasn't some made-up fairy tale. It actually was inspired by real people and real events in history. Originally, it was written for kind of a messed up reason. So if you love Beauty and the Beast and you don't want it ruined, I would suggest that this is a video you may want to skip, because that's kind of the reason for the video. Spoilers, it doesn't end with happily ever after. Believe it or not, Beauty and the Beast is not a tale as old as time. It really didn't have one author. It has actually been written 7 different ways by 7 different authors through history, starting as early as 125 to 180 CE. If you want me to go over each one of them and the history behind them and who wrote them and why, I can certainly do that, guys, for you. But for simplicity reason, I'm just going to cover the 3 stories that closely relate to the Disney film. The original Beast was a man. His name was originally Pedro Gonzalez. He was born in the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa in the year 1537. He was unfortunately born with a very rare genetic condition called hypertrichosis. This condition is also known as werewolf syndrome. Throughout history, there has only been 50 documented cases from around the world. And the people that suffer from this condition deal with abnormal hair growth all over their body. It may cover their entire face, their entire body, and it can either show up at birth, like they're born with hair all over their body, or it can develop over time. I think in Pedro's case, it kind of developed over time. He had enough time to kind of grow and develop and kind of survive a little bit before the condition developed, and so then he was outcast and abandoned by his family then. When he was a child, he resorted to living in caves there on the islands. He survived off things that he could catch himself and water that he can find. There are stories that maybe the missionaries in the area contributed to his survival by giving him food and water to survive, but I couldn't find a way to confirm or deny that. In 1947, Pedro would have been about 10 years old, and all he's known is the islands and the caves at this point. And somehow these French privateers found out about Pedro. I don't know if maybe they found out through the missionaries or whether they just saw him while they were there at the islands, but they decided to capture Pedro, force him in this very, very small cage, because animals weren't treated very well back in those days, and to them, Pedro wasn't a human being, he was an animal. So they forced him into a small cage. They put him on a ship, and he was bound for France because they had decided he was going to be this great gift for Henry II on the day of his coronation. Now, this cage was probably very small. He probably couldn't have stood up in it, because it was fully made of bars on the top, the sides, and the bottom. It was probably very uncomfortable to sit because he was just sitting on bars. He didn't have bathroom facilities, so he probably just went to the bathroom through the bars. They only gave him animal feed or raw meat and water, because like I said, nobody saw poor Pedro as a human being. They only saw him as an animal. And a lot of people through history referred to him as a wild man. Now, poor Pedro, he was probably terrified because, one, he's being taken away from everything that he has known up until, that point in time. And I'm sure they weren't nice to him on the ship. But once he arrived to King Henry's court, he was immediately thrown in a dungeon. So it's almost the opposite of Beauty and the Beast. The Beauty didn't get thrown in the dungeon, the Beast did. And while he was there, he was studied by the court physicians, which required a lot of poking and prodding and just staring at him all the time, which had to have been awful. He was seen as a curiosity in the courts. He wasn't seen as a human being, much like little people or people with large stature. They were seen as, it was almost like the courts had freak shows like in carnivals. So you can imagine all the commotion about the boy and how terrifying this must have been for Pedro. Now, at one of his many visits to the court in front of King Henry took the time to look in the boy's eyes. He saw intelligence in those eyes. So he decided he wanted to form some sort of experiment. He was going to try to teach the wild man how to be a nobleman. So he decided that Pedro would be renamed. He would no longer be called Pedro Gonzalez. He would be given the Latin form of that name, which was Petrus Gonsalvus, which is very close but very different. So from now on, we're going to refer to him as Petrus. He was given fine clothes to wear, as a nobleman should. He was given the best tutors, the same tutors that the children in the court would go to. He was also given 3 hot meals a day. Now, not only did young Petrus learn to speak, read, and write, but he learned to do so in 3 different languages. He learned how to conduct himself in court, and he learned everything there was about etiquette. And when he was in his 20s, he actually earned the great honor of being the waiter for the royal table, which is a huge honor. He even went on to learn law, and he actually taught at the local college, the Sorbonne University. He also became the young Charles IX's personal storyteller. So he was very intelligent, but no matter all his accolades and education, they still never saw Petrus as a human being. He was always the wild man. That was basically Petrus's life until 1559, when King Henry suddenly died of sepsis. What had happened is he entered a jousting tournament. The joust exploded. Shrapnel actually went in his eye and his brain. The physicians at the time, because they didn't know any better, decided to take on a wait-and-see attitude to see if he improved on his own. And in doing so, he developed sepsis, which ultimately caused him to pass away. Now, this is really bad for Petrus because that left him at the mercy of his very cruel widow, Queen Catherine de Medici. She was known to be very cruel. For example, she invited her religious rivals for this arranged marriage. She had them come in. Once they came into town, she ordered the thousands of them to be slaughtered in the streets. I mean, she was barbaric. She decided she wanted to do her own little experiment with Petrus and see if the beast would actually produce offspring that were beast-like or human-like. And to add to the entertainment value, she decided that she was going to arrange his marriage, and the unsuspecting wife would not know that she was marrying the wild man of the court. So she wouldn't know until she walked down the aisle who she was marrying, because the queen wanted to see her reaction. The girl that she picked was the daughter of a servant of the court. She was known to be very beautiful. She actually had a bright yellow dress in a lot of the portraits, just like Belle. And at the time, arranged marriages were commonplace, and it was a high honor to have a marriage arranged from the Queen Regent herself. So there was no way that either one of them could say no to the Queen. Now, coincidentally, this poor girl's name was Catherine also. Now, Petrus and Catherine first met when she walked down the aisle. So they never crossed paths. They never talked to each other. They didn't get to know each other. They literally walked down the aisle, put in front of the priest, and married, and that was that. So, you can imagine that when they first got together, they were very awkward with each other. But as the story goes, Catherine eventually got to know Petrus, fell in love with him, and they eventually had 7 children together. But unfortunately, this was not going to be a happily ever after for them. Just like Petrus through his life, the whole family was passed around from court to court to court to be gawked at. Now, to Queen Catherine's delight, 4 of the 7 children actually developed the werewolf syndrome that their father had. So in Queen Catherine's eyes, her experiment was a success. She was able to produce what she referred to as a wild family. Now, eventually the family ended up with the Duke Ranuccio Farnese of Parma, and they said that the family worked for him, which basically meant that they were slaves to him, because he basically exploited the family, because again, he did not see Petrus as a human being. So the children that developed the same syndrome as him weren't seen as human beings either. So eventually the Duke took the children that suffered the condition from the family, and he basically gave them away as court pets to other courts across Europe. Now, Petrus and Catherine were married for over 40 years. divorce. Catherine passed away in 1623, and they think Petrus followed her a couple years later. Unfortunately, because he wasn't seen as a human, he wasn't given last rites, so there's no record of what caused him to pass away or when exactly he died. Now, in 1740, a French writer named Gabrielle Suzanne Barbat de Villeneuve, I know I probably butchered that, but it's thought that she heard about Petrus and Catherine. She created the story of Beauty and the Beast and included it in a short story collection called The Young Americans, also known as The Tales of the Sea. It was then rewritten a couple years later by Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont. Beaumont's telling was a lot closer to the Disney version. Finally, a Scottish folklorist by the name of Andrew Lang heard the story, and he heard both versions, and basically what he did was merge the two stories in 1889. Sorry, my cat. You gonna say hi to the camera? This is Raven. You'll hear her in all my videos, but yeah, if you hear meows in the background, that's this little ball of fur. You want down? The reason that Villeneuve originally wrote Beauty and the Beast was not just to have some sweet little fairy tale to tell boys and girls. There was actually some pretty dark motivations behind it. It was basically specifically designed to groom young girls who were being forced into arranged marriages at like 11 and 12 to not be afraid of their much older husbands, because like the older men were probably big, burly, sometimes loud, hair covered men. It was a story to help them not be so scared of their husbands and to see their husband as a person to make all their dreams come true, and that it would eventually work out and it's the best thing in the end. No matter the appearance or the demeanor of the husband, they were the man that was worth love and devotion. Like, it's pretty messed up in my opinion, but that's the way it was back then. So, did I ruin Beauty and the Beast for you today? Would you like me to ruin more fairy tales that you may have loved as a child or your kids loved growing up? Let me know in the comments below. I have a couple more that I can do that history is a little quite different, and the original stories are quite different than the Disney-esque version that we know nowadays. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe so I know to make more of these videos for you. And as always, thank you for watching. Good night and sweet dreams. Bye-bye.